Welcome to TSHL 101. Gary Gerstenhaber and myself, Gary Emmer, today are joined by two of the newest members of the TSHL, Eric and Carol Hammersen. They may be new to the TSHL, but they are certainly not new to public service. Both have been active in civic life, including city and community leadership roles, and they jumped right into the work that happened during the May legislative session. We're going to talk with them about their background in civic engagement, their first impressions of the May session, and how they plan to use their time in the TSHL to advocate for issues that matter to older Texans. Welcome, guys.
Thank you very much.
Eric and Carol, you guys can choose who's going to speak, or you can both speak at the same time, whichever you're happy doing. You're both new members of the TSHL, but not new to public service. Can you share a little bit about your civic or city council related work before joining the legislature? What experiences from your previous community involvement prepared you for the work you're doing now with the TSHL? And what motivated each of you to step into this role and represent older Texans?
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Yes.
Basically, we've been involved in advocating for people for our entire adult lives.
When I was fresh out of college, I went to work for the Girl Scouts, and I lived in an area and served 5 different counties, one of which was every bit as affluent as the area we're in now. And then the other 4 were filled with rural poverty. And then when I married this person over here, who's the love of my life, he said to me when we were first married, take care of my soldiers and take care of their families. And so I have been involved with programs for spouses at the very local level, starting in, someone's living room, going through a base-wide level on the national level as well, and advocating for good common sense ideas that made life better for everybody, regardless of their age.
Since moving to Fredericksburg, I have had the opportunity to be part of various community organizations around here that are advocating for things that are important. I've also served on various city boards and commissions. And you were asking about, what has prepared us for the kind of work we're doing. I've spent my entire adult life trying to identify issues that needed to be fixed and then advocating for solutions. I was in the military for more than 30 years, and then I worked for the federal government for another 16 years before we retired and moved to Texas. And there was an awful lot of work that was involved in saying, we need to do this, and then trying to figure out how to get the support necessary, the money, the personnel, the office space, and things like that in order to make those things happen.
We've always known that the most successful initiatives that we can find are ones that give the benefits to the most number of people and are cost efficient. And so that's always a goal that's sort of running in the back of our brains. How do we fix this for reasonable prices to help the largest number of people?
You asked what motivated each of us to step into this role and represent older Texans. One of the things that really impressed me was that TSHL was nonpartisan.
Yes.
The other thing that I was looking at was, well, I can have an impact here in Fredericksburg, maybe in Gillespie County, by working with the city and the county commissioners. TSHL basically has the ability to be able to have an impact that is statewide as well as local, because the issues that TSHL is looking at are issues that impact people who live here in our area, but they also impact the rest of the state. I grew up in El Paso. My dad was stationed out of Fort Bliss when I was younger. But Texas is a gigantic state. It really is. Those who have never driven across it have no concept of what we mean when we say Texas is really big. But TSHL touches every part of the state.
And let's not forget, we're older Texans, in case you haven't noticed. So what's good for the people we can advocate for is also good for us. And I personally have always enjoyed, and it is an honor to advocate for people who may not advocate for themselves because they either don't feel they have a voice or they're shy. I mean, public speaking is a huge fear for so many people. And there is that element in this. And I'm perfectly happy to do the right thing to get their voices heard.
I want to know about your first impressions of the legislative session that just happened in May. What were some of the things that stood out to you about the process?
I was extremely impressed by the TSHL legislators that we met while we were in Austin. Those individuals clearly, as well as they clearly thought out what it was they were looking to do. They had done tremendous research, and then they carefully executed their presentations for the process to develop recommendations.
And I thought that the clarity of thought that was in each of those proclamations and just the intellectual integrity of the people, the breadth of their experience. They come from all walks of life. And, the can-do attitude. One of the things that we find, this is our 24th house. And so every time you move, you go to a new community. And so some people are reluctant to seek change, even when it's for the best. But these are people who want to come up with good solutions that give a lot of people buy-in to the success of doing something different and new to fix a problem.
Was there anything or any particular resolution that stood out to you during this session?
For our area where we live, issues that regard water, electricity, and the environment are very important. I also was interested in the concept of standardizing statutory definitions of what is an older Texan. In Texas law, it says it's 60 and above. But it's astonishing to find out that other laws say, oh, that doesn't kick in until you're 62 or 63 or 64 or 65. If we have a law, which, by the way, matches what's in federal law, I would like to see that standardized across the state.
I think for me, I can't stand the idea of anybody going hungry. And in our very affluent community that we just talked about offline, there are so many people who are hungry. And we have a school, which is going to be a beautiful one when they get the next new school built, because they've just opened one. But 60% of the children are on some sort of assistance. 60%. And with the, increase the SNAP benefits, but also the other thing is just that we also need rural hospitals that can deal with older people's problems. Gerontology should be the standard in small rural communities as well as in big cities. And finally, because we had a lovely ice storm a few years ago, the fact that we don't have generators in all of the nursing homes, we have a lot of people who couldn't get out of their property out in the county for days and days. They had no electricity for weeks. And I understand that when you have 30 miles of line down, that happens. But somebody gets a cell phone call from grandma and she says, I'm cold and I'm in the nursing home. I don't want people getting in their trucks to drive on ice and snow to try to get grandma and save her by keeping her around the fireplace. So the idea of generated power for emergencies is critical.
Carol's comment about healthcare in rural areas is really important. We're fortunate to have a hospital here in Fredericksburg. Kerrville has another one as well. But in the other communities around here, 50 miles in every direction, there's not a single hospital. And so that we really need to have boost in rural healthcare capabilities across the state of Texas, especially for older Texans who have a tendency to live disproportionately in rural areas because that's where they grew up.
And the other thing, according to what we've spoken about, is the idea of full practice authority for nurse practitioners. That is wonderful healthcare. Usually, always the nurse will talk to you longer than the doctor will. We understand that. We've all had that happen. But if those people are in clinics that have resources, that's going to make a huge difference. No one's going to drive 90 miles because, I just felt this little fluttering. But you might be willing to drive 10 miles to go see the nurse practitioner, and he or she might say, we need to get a medevac in here and save someone's life.
Now that you've experienced your first session, how do you see yourselves using your time between now and the next session to advocate for TSHL priorities? And you've already mentioned a couple specific issues, such as healthcare, transportation, kinship care, insurance. Do you feel especially called to work on those as well, which you kind of mentioned? And how do you plan to engage with your local communities to raise awareness about the TSHL and issues that we're championing?
We are engaging with older Texans locally and with organizations that provide services to older Texans. And not only are we informing them of what TSHL does, we're asking them to engage with their representatives and senators because they can be force multipliers. They can write an email to their representative, to their senator. Just as And that backs up the things that we can do as legislators in TSHL when we actually go and advocate for these issues in order to be able to say, oh, by the way, one of the points you make is you're the largest constituent you have in your district. And so, pay attention to what your constituents really, really want to have done.
As Eric mentioned earlier, we have a whole series of people we've contacted in organizations, but we'd like to see community roundtables, maybe once a quarter, that have at least some issues for older Texans. I'm particularly concerned about elder abuse because in talking with the person who runs the local shelter for people who have been abused, elder abuse is a serious issue. And I think it's overlooked in some areas because people are afraid to speak out and say, I have a problem or I don't feel safe in my own home. That to me, just that as we approach the end of our lives, that we're hungry or we're abused is just such a powerful statement that says we no longer are valuing elders as much as they need to be, and we are not caring for them as they have cared for us when we were growing up. So that would kind of be my personal sense of I need to be their voice and I need to build trust with that community.
I'm particularly interested in rural access, especially to healthcare issues. I was down at the local VA clinic in Kerrville. They have a program where they go out and talk to people who in their homes, the physical therapy nurses, et cetera. And I asked what was the largest problem they had. Well, TSHL deals with state issues and not with federal issues like the VA. They said the number one issue they had was access, transportation. They provided care, medical care through the VA, but people had no way to get there. They had no way they could come in on an ambulance, but the ambulance wouldn't take them home afterwards. So they were putting off routine care to the point where it now became an emergency. And so I think that access to care locally is a very important thing in rural areas, and we're considered a rural area.
Do you find your county judges to be welcoming?
The county judge, we know the county judge, and we have known him since he was working for the city.
We first moved here.
When we first moved here, and he's a very open individual. I've never had any difficulty having access to him. Obviously, he's very busy right now. There's an awful lot going on, and even more so if there's a wildfire in the area, or if we've got issues with screwworm infestation. Those are things that are very immediate. But we've always found him to be a very thoughtful individual who is open to discussing things with you.
Did he offer any kind of situations or thoughts about issues that are impacting his community that we could work on?
Well, while we've had the opportunity to talk with the city mayor and the city council, we've not yet been able to talk with the judge after the session that we had last month in Austin at the end of the month.
But we will.
But we're definitely
He's on the list.
He's on the list of people we're going to chat with.
What are your goals for the first full year as a TSHL member? You want to be a committee chair? You want to promote yourself to be part of the executive team? What do you think about all those things?
Well, I think in the first year, I'm going to focus on getting smarter on the processes that are involved. I'm relatively familiar with the processes of getting legislation approved at the national level. I had lots of experience with that in my other life before I moved out here. And I have discovered that the process in Texas at the state level is somewhat different. I seem to recall a civics class when I was in high school, but it's been a long time and a lot of things have changed since then. So I think that for the first year, I want to really get smart. The other thing I want to do is educate older Texans and community leaders on what TSHL is and what it does. Mm-hmm. As all of us have found that are in TSHL, when we go to talk to people, the first response normally is, "I didn't know that existed."
That's true.
And
that was our previous mayor who just left office in May.
Never heard of it before, and he'd been a mayor off and on for 10 years, so it was pretty astonishing. Fortunately, one of the members of the city council said, "Why, yes, I knew the person from this county who had served in that role. She died in 2015 at the age of 100, and it sort of fell off the radar after that." And so we're trying to raise awareness, both in the community itself and in the leadership of that particular community.
Well, that's going to bring us to the close of today's episode of TSHL 101. Gary Gerstenhaber and I want to extend our heartfelt thanks to Eric and Carol Hammersen for spending time with us and for sharing their insight and their passion. Their commitment to older Texans is a reminder of what can happen when people step forward and get involved. And that's our encouragement to you as well. Texas needs voices, advocates, and neighbors who care. We invite you to join Eric and Carol in the fight for older Texans, whether it's through community involvement, local leadership, or simply raising awareness about the issues that matter. We'll continue the second part of our conversation with them next week, so be sure to join us again. And to learn more about the Texas Silver Haired Legislature and how you can make a difference, visit tshl.org. And remember, you can catch a new episode of TSHL 101 every Tuesday at 6:15 p.m. Thanks for listening, and thank you for being a part of a community that cares.